Hi there, my name's Alex and today I'm going to show you how to make this super cute froggy hat, just like the hat that Harry Styles wears. This is a fairly easy tutorial, but you will need to be a little bit experienced in crochet just to get through some of the stitches, but I'll try and explain it as clearly and simply as I can for you. For this project, you're going to need some yarn in yellow, green, orange or black, and a small amount of white and black to do the eyes and the mouth. A crochet hook, preferably two sizes, one size a bit smaller than the other, and a pair of scissors, a needle and some pins. Optional, some felt and fabric glue if you want to make the heart cheeks, embroidery cotton if you'd like to use that for the mouth, and a little bit of fibre fill if you want to fill the eyes of your frog. Now I'll be creating this tutorial using a worsted weight yarn, which is very similar to the Red Heart Super Saver or Bernat Premium, Karen Simply Soft, Lion Brand 24/7 cotton. There's quite a few different yarns you could use, so I'll pop those in the description for you. I'm also using a 4.5mm hook for the hat and a 3.5mm hook for the eyes. So we'll start round one by creating a magic ring. If you're having trouble creating a magic ring, I do have two tutorials available on my channel. One of them has a really quick and easy hack as well, so probably worth checking out if you're having trouble with that. Now you want to create one chain, which is going to count as the very first stitch on your magic ring, and then work 7 half double crochets around that magic ring. If you haven't created this stitch before, the half double crochet, I do have a tutorial for that as well, but I'm trying to show you here as clearly as I can so you don't have to go out of this tutorial to see how to do that. To create the half double crochet, you yarn over your hook, put your hook through the magic ring, yarn over again, and then pulling that through all 3 loops on your hook. Hey there, just wanted to say thanks so much for dropping by and checking out this tutorial. If you're enjoying it, please hit that like button and also consider subscribing if you haven't subscribed already. I've got so many fantastic, creative and fun tutorials coming up, so you don't want to miss out, and I don't want you to miss out. Now for round 2, you'll be creating 8 half double crochet increases. Now this sounds really complex, but all you're really doing is creating 2 half double crochets in the same stitch space. So you want to work 8 of those around, so that's 16 stitches, and I will see you back after that. In addition to the note that you're seeing up on the top left hand side of your screen, yes, you can use a chunkier or bulky style of yarn like the Bernat blanket yarn, as long as you're happy with the colour that you've got and you're using a larger hook to suit that particular yarn. You can use it to follow this tutorial. We're working in multiples of 8 increases per round, and you may need to increase that to multiples of 10 or multiples of 12 if you're using a bulkier yarn. For round 3, you'll be creating 1 half double crochet and then a half double crochet increase 8 times around, giving you 24 stitches. Now something I hadn't mentioned was that you could use a stitch marker for this project. In fact, it's probably a really good idea. If you don't have a stitch marker, you could simply just use a paper clip, piece of yarn, a safety pin, or even a bobby pin. Just mark at the beginning or the end of a round so that you know where you're up to. Now for round 4, you'll be creating 2 half double crochets and then a half double crochet increase, repeating that 8 times around, giving you 32 stitches. On to round 5, you'll be creating 3 half double crochets and a half double crochet increase, repeating that 8 times around, giving you 40 stitches. On to round 6, that will be 4 half double crochets, 1 increase, repeating that 8 times around, giving you 48 stitches. If you're enjoying creating this froggy hat, you're going to love the next couple of projects I've got coming up for you. One of them is a strawberry hat, and another one is the Harry Styles cardigan made into a hat, and it's a no-sew project, so it's all done in one piece. You're going to love it. Now, I just thought I'd point out that you can actually see the lines of increases coming out or radiating out from the center of your magic ring. They're a little bit hard to see here, but there are 8 actual rows of increases and they all line up. So that's what your work should be looking like. Hopefully it is. On to round 7, 5 half double crochets, 1 increase, repeating that 8 times around, giving you 56 stitches. Now at this stage you should have completed 7 rounds of work in a spiral. If you're working with a bulky or chunkier style of yarn, you may need to stop and just check the measurements. I'll pop a timestamp for you where you should go to check the measurements of your work. Anyone who's working with a worsted weight, Aran weight or a DK weight yarn, it's on to round 8, which is 6 half double crochets, 1 increase, repeating that 8 times around, giving you 64 stitches. So now's a really good time just to check your work and make sure that it's heading to the right size that you're after for your hat. Now 3 different size, adult size hats here, the small, medium and large. I'm after between a small to medium size, which is a bit smaller than the yellow one that I've shown you at the beginning of the video. So I want my work to measure about 16.5 centimeters across, or 6.5 inches. So you want to keep working your rounds, increasing 8 by 8 stitches every round until you get to that width. So for me, I'm continuing on to round 9, 10 and 11, and that will give me 88 stitches at the end of round 11. Now I'm just going to measure my work again to make sure that I am right on track. So you don't want to stretch your crochet work when you're measuring, but you do want to make sure that you're getting right to that edge. So a little over 6.5 inches and about the 16.5 centimeters. So I'm spot on. It's time for me to start working on the side of the hat. So at this point it may look like it's very small, but it will actually get bigger once you start creating the sides. Now for the sides, really super easy. Pop your stitch marker in and you're going to just create half double crochets for as many rounds as it takes for your hat to measure the same measurements that I gave you before, which is the 16, 17 and 18 centimeters, but this time you're going to be measuring it from the very beginning or the middle part of our magic ring and then down to the edge. So if you imagine folding the hat in half when it's finished, you're measuring from the very top of the hat where that magic ring is and then down to where you want your brim to start. So the sizes that I've got there are really just a guideline for you. You may want to try it on halfway through creating the side of your hat and making sure that it fits you just the way you want it to fit. Now trust me, you can never measure your work too many times. You can never count your stitches too many times. So I'm just taking some time out now to have a look at how my work's progressing and whether I need to add any more rounds before I add the brim. So remember I was after about the 16.5 centimeters or the 6.5 inches. So it looks like one more round for me. If you're using a bulky or a chunkier style yarn, you may need to make this a little bit deeper in the measurement than what I'm suggesting, simply because the yarn will take up some of the bulk when you're creating the measurement, and you may need just to add an extra round on there or an extra couple of stitches on there just to get that to fit you the way you want it to fit. Okay, let's measure again and make sure that we've got just the right amount of stitches there that we need to get to measure our 16.5 or 6.5 inches. Perfect. Okay, it's time to add the brim. Now, this next round is probably the trickiest one of the whole project. It's not that tricky, but it's going to make sure that the brim sits out really nicely, and you'll be thankful that you've done this because it's just going to give the hat a little bit more of a finish, a nice finish to it. So the stitch we're going to do to transition from the side of the hat to the brim is a variation on a single crochet stitch. So with crocheting, you see that you've got a back loop and a front loop. But there's also a strange sort of front post part of that stitch as well. It goes down and goes under the round or the row that you've just crocheted over. So what we want to do is we want to stick the hook through underneath that front post and then through the front loop. So I'll show you that. Hook underneath that front post, then up and through the middle of that crochet stitch, so it's only just taking up that front loop, yarn over and pulling it all the way through, yarn over and through the 2 loops on your hook. We'll do that again. Under that post, underneath the front loop, yarn over, pulling it through those 2 loops, yarn over through the remaining 2 loops. Okay, so what I want you to do is to do that stitch all the way around, just this one round, but I also want you to increase 8 times evenly around that round as well. So say for example you have 80 stitches, that was the last round that you did when you created the top part of your hat. We would then need to create 88 stitches for this brim. That would be every 10 stitches you need to increase a stitch. So you would create 9 of those strange single crochet stitches, and then you would do an increase in the next one, an increase of a single crochet stitch. So you can see how well that strange single crochet stitch really changes the direction of your crochet work. So for brim round number 2, you're going to simply single crochet all the way around. Now this method of increasing then not increasing, each alternating those rounds, will give you a fairly straight-ish kind of brim. If you want your brim to flare out a lot more, then you'll want to increase every single round by the 8 stitches. For brim round 3, I am creating single crochet all the way around, but increasing it by 8 stitches evenly around. Now for rounds 4 and 5 of the brim, the 4 I'll be single crocheting all the way around, and for round 5 I'll be single crocheting all the way around but increasing it by the 8 stitches. Now I'm going to repeat rounds 4 and 5 until I reach the width of the brim that I want for my hat, and then I'll finish that off with the brim edge, which is coming up a little bit later in the tutorial. Now remember, if you want more of a flared brim, you want to increase it by 8 stitches every round. If you want it a little bit straighter, then you'll just increase it by the 8 stitches every second round. I'm really sorry if this is confusing. I've tried to make it so that this pattern can be used for pretty much any yarn that you've got. So by doing that, it has to be flexible enough to be able to handle all sorts of yarns. So that's why I've tried to do this. So this gives you an example of my pattern. So my first round was 96 stitches, my second was 96 stitches, then increasing it by the 8 stitches took it up to 104 stitches. The next round was just single crochet all the way around, so it didn't increase. So every second round my brim is increased by 8 stitches. I'll put some notes in the description just to help you work out your counts for 8 increases, and hopefully that will just help you out a little bit too. Now when you've reached the desired width of the brim for your hat, we're just going to finish it off by slip stitching around the edge. So what you need to do is insert the hook under the top 2 loops of your stitch, yarn over and pulling that through and through the loop on your hook. Now this is a really simple finish. It doesn't look like it's doing much. It certainly isn't adding any length to the brim. What it's actually doing is creating a thicker finish, and it gives it a little bit more stability and just a nicer finish. And it keeps the shape in the brim a lot better than not finishing it off. So you want to work the slip stitch all the way around the brim. And when you finish that round, you're going to cut your yarn and just stitch in the tail. Now that brim's nice and thick. You'll know once you've done that it adds a really nice sort of little chunky edge to your hat. So it's really ideal to hide the tail of your yarn in there. So just putting the needle through that nice thick edge of your hat, and just going backwards and forwards a couple of times and trim off any excess yarn. So now's the perfect time to sew in the other tail where we started at the magic ring, just by weaving that in and out of the existing stitches and then trimming the excess tail yarn. If you decide to make any of the projects that I have tutorials for on my channel, please share them with me on Instagram. Hashtag makeitwithalex. I would love to see them. This is looking great. I hope you're really happy with your progress. Now let's make those froggy eyes. Now when you're creating your frog's eyes, you want to use a hook size smaller if you can, especially if you're going to put some fibre fill in it like I have with the yellow one. It just prevents the fibre fill coming through those holes with the larger hook that you're using. So I'm going to be using a 3.5mm hook for the eyes. So you start off with your black yarn, creating a magic ring. You're going to chain 1 stitch, which counts as the very first stitch on the magic ring, like it did when we started doing the hat. And then you're going to work 11 half double crochets around that circle. Now the reason we start with 12 half double crochets into the magic ring is because Harry Styles' hat has 12 little kind of spikes around the eye, so I've tried to match it as closely as possible to the sewn version. Have you hit that like button yet? I hope you have. And please consider subscribing. I don't want you to miss out on some fantastic stuff coming up. Once you've completed your 12 stitches, you can cut your yarn, tighten the magic ring a little, not completely, and we're going to add the white yarn before we join to the top of that very first chain stitch we created onto the magic ring. So that's where we're going to join, but before we do that, we're going to undo the last half double crochet. It's gone. Now we're going to half create it. Yarn, yarn over, pull it through, but we're not going to complete the stitch. We're going to add the white yarn to that now and put through those 3 loops on our hook. And now we can slip stitch to that very first chain in round 1 for the eye. Now by doing our yarn colour change this way, it's seamless. You don't see how it's changed. There's nothing that gives it away as to that's where it's started or it's changed colour. So after that you can tighten up the magic ring. And what I like to do is just tie the 2 black tails together and then trim any excess. And then that way you know that eye is not going to come apart. And because it's not on show, it's inside the eye, you don't need to stitch it and hide it so that it's nice and neat. No one's going to see it. So we're going to continue on to round 2, which will be to create another half double crochet but in the same stitch space as the slip stitch we just created. And then 11 half double crochet increases. So that's just 2 half double crochets in every stitch space around, which will give you 24 stitches at the end of round 2 of the eye. I don't know why, but this is my favourite part of this project, apart from wearing the froggy hat. Time to cut our yarn and change to our main colour. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with the last round. We're going to undo our last half double crochet, half create it, and then pull through our, in this case, green yarn to complete that half double crochet. Slip stitch to the top of the second chain that you created. Yeah, nasty little stitch this one. And chain twice. Then create a half double crochet, and now tie your white tails together and trim off any excess. Now for those of you who know me, you know that I'm in heaven when I'm tying knots. Okay, on to round 3. So we're going to continue that round by creating a half double crochet increase. And then we're going to repeat the pattern of 2 half double crochets and a half double crochet increase. We're going to repeat that 6 times around, which will leave you with 3 stitches of white that you haven't touched yet. I cannot believe that I have got this far into the video and I haven't once cracked a frog or a croak joke. I mean, I guess my throat is a bit my voice is croaky, and I am feeling a little bit hoppier for making this pattern. Okay, all going well, we've got 3 white stitch spaces left. Now, we're not just going to crochet around because it would only give us a small area to sew our little eye onto our froggy hat. So we're going to give it a nice little curved section so that we've got a nice area to sew it on, and it's going to look super cute that way too. So I want you to chain 1 and then slip stitch into the base of the last half double crochet increase you created. Then slip stitch into the next 3 white stitch spaces. It's 1, 2, 3. Slip stitch into that next strange little sort of green space. Chain 1 and then slip stitch to the top of the first half double crochet you created. Look at that. Cute little curve, just perfect to put on your hat. Now trim the yarn, and you don't need to leave any length with this because we don't need to use that to sew it to the hat. We're going to use the long tail on the back of the eye. So you can tie those, more knots. You can tie those green tails together and trim off any excess. Say, what did the frog order at McDonald's? He ordered French fries and a Diet Coke. Now the back of the eye is made exactly the same as the front of the eye, just using the one solid colour. So I've just put a little reminder up the top left corner of what that pattern is, or you can go back. I've got plenty of timestamps in the description for you. So when you've completed your 3 rounds for the back of the eye, don't cut the yarn because we're going to continue on by joining it through crocheting, because I love crocheting. I'm not a big fan of sewing, so let's try and eliminate as much sewing as we can for this project. You with me? Have you heard about the thirstiest frog in the world? It drinks Canada Dry. Now don't forget, your froggy hat is going to have 2 eyes, so you'll need to make another eye front, and then follow this again to make the back and then join it. Now, as I suggested before, you can add a little bit of fibre fill to your eye. I've done that with 2 hats. This third one I'm not going to do that, mostly just to show you what it's going to look like without anything, without any fill in it, and just to prove that it will stand up really well without fill. So it's not essential. It looks cute, but you don't need to have the fibre fill in that. Okay, so we've finished the back of eye 1, and we're going to just tighten, make sure that that magic ring is nice and tight, and put the front and the back together so it's lining up with the right sides facing out. So we're going to slip stitch around the edge. Now, because we know we've got exactly the same amount of stitches for the front and the back of the eye, it's going to be just a matter of putting the hook through each stitch that corresponds, lining up with each other, yarn over, pulling it through, and then through the loop on your hook. Now you want to go all the way around the eye except for the little curved bottom section. So you're really just going around the circles, nearly the circles, but you're leaving that little open section at the bottom, and that's going to be left open so you can put fibre fill in it, and it's also just how we're going to and where we're going to attach it to the hat, so it doesn't need to be closed up. Hey, I learned something new today about frogs. Do you know how deep they can go? Knee deep. Knee deep. Okay, so when you've finished joining the eye front and back together, cut off your yarn, making sure that your tail is long enough to be able to sew it to the hat, and just hide any other tails back inside the little eye. And as I mentioned before, you've got to make 2 of these, and if you want to add some fibre fill, you can add that now. Okay, pop your 2 eyes aside and decide on what sort of froggy face you're going to have. There's this one here, I call him Happy Hearts, or there's the original one that's more like the one that Harry Styles wears. With the original style, you would start by having 1 strand of your black yarn or a couple of strands of embroidery cotton, and creating the little flower motif at one end, bringing it back, the yarn back out to the front and creating that curve of the mouth, and then creating the other little flower motif, and then going back through over the smile curve a couple of times back to where you started, and that's just to keep the smile in place, and it also gives you a good point to be able to finish your yarn off at the back. For the Happy Hearts one, which is what I'm doing today, I'm going to create a chain stitch. Now my chain stitch is going to be around about 5 inches or 12.5 centimeters long, and leaving a tail at both ends so I can stitch it into place. Do you know, a recent study found that most frogs want to really get into music. How weird's that? For some reason they're really into hip hop. When you're happy with the length of the chain for your frog's smile, cut off the yarn, making sure you've got a long enough tail to be able to sew it in place. Place your hat with the join or the row overlap at the back of the hat, and then measure halfway along the chain stitch for your frog's mouth and position that centrally on the front of your hat. 3 pins should be enough to hold the little froggy's mouth in place in the middle, and 1 on each end. And just move that around until you're happy with the position of the mouth. Squeeze! Yeah, that looks cute. And when you're happy with that, we're going to sew the little mouth into place by using the long tail end. Thread that onto your needle, and just by going in and out of the center part of your chain, and just curving the mouth around as you're stitching it in place. Use your hook just to take in the tail from the other end of the mouth and stitch the end of the mouth firmly. Bring it through to the other side. I like to tie those little tails together because you know I like to tie knots. And then hide the tails just by weaving it in and out of your crochet work behind the little smile and trimming off any excess. Hey, I never knew that frogs liked clothes, but apparently they're really into footwear. And I believe their favourite is open-toed sandals. Now, to position the frog's eyes, you want to make sure that your hat is nice and flat, folded in half neatly with the mouth central to the front, and just position and pin the eye on the front edge. So what I've just done, I'm counting the rounds to make sure that I get them to line up because you don't want an odd-eyed frog. So then threading the long tail on one eye and sewing it along the front. And I like to do the front face because that's the most important to make sure that it looks right. So we're going to sew across the front. And that little green edge that we added to the bottom part of the curve of the eye is perfect to disguise our sewing too. Then round to the back and across that back edge. And then just finish off sewing on the eye by going backwards and forwards and weaving your tail throughout your stitching, and then trim off any excess yarn when you find that it's secure enough. Now you want to add the second eye, but just before you stitch it in place, make sure that nothing has moved when you've attached the first eye. You may need to readjust slightly where you've pinned your eye. So once you're happy with that, go ahead and attach it exactly the same way that we did the first one. Across the front, across the back, hide the tail, trim that excess yarn. It's time to grab your felt and get cheeky. Now I've decided to use little heart cheeks, which I like to use for some of my projects. A little circle cheek looks really cute as well on the frog hat. So I've just got a felt heart that I'm going to use for another project, and I cut around that and then use that as a template to cut around my second heart to make sure they're exactly the same size. And then using some fabric craft glue, attach those to the hat either side of your froggy's little mouth. It's so cold. I think I might need to get myself a hot cup of, what's that drink that frogs like? Oh, hot croco. Okay, if you've made it this far, yay! Well done you. You sat through not only a whole entire making of a frog hat, but several silly frog puns. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful and maybe even a little bit fun. If you did, please give me a big thumbs up. It doesn't cost you anything to do that, but it means the world to me if you appreciate what I'm doing, and it encourages me to keep creating and making more content for you. Also consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of my fun videos in the future. Thanks again, and as always, remember to stay awesome.